Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Marjorie Lynn Bank Lecture Series. I am John Racanelli, CEO of the National Aquarium. I call myself Big Fish. My staff calls me Fish Head. Either way, it is my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight to our continuation. And I think is it the final talk in our spring series? I've lost track. Or did we end up having a spring, summer, fall series? Oh, that's right. That's right. June 3rd, Jesse Ossabel will be coming back. For those of you that were signed up to hear him a couple of weeks ago, we hope you can make it back for that date. But it is a great pleasure to talk about what we're going to be hearing tonight. Before I do that, I would like to remind everybody part of why we're here tonight. First of all, it's in commemoration of a wonderful woman. Some of you have heard about her, Marjorie Lynn Bank. A photojournalist, a diver, a naturalist, left this world all too early, but left a great legacy, and her family, the Bank family, has endowed this lecture series in her memory. Her talent and passion for capturing the beauty of aquatic life has inspired us to bring here people who have that same passion and that same commitment, and it's thanks to the generosity of the Bank family that we can do it. And for that, I'd like to, is Penny here tonight? Okay, well, Penny Bank is a stalwart, beloved member of our volunteer corps and a member of the Bank family that made all this happen. Actually, nothing that we do here at the National Aquarium would be possible if not for our members and generous donors. And every day, your support helps us fulfill our mission, which is to inspire conservation of the world's aquatic treasures. And we believe aquatic treasures take many, many forms. They can be habitats, they can be ecosystems, they can be animals, they can be plants, they can be humans, they can be communities. In fact, they are communities. We all live in communities, as do all of the animals and plants in nature that we share this beautiful planet with. Thanks are also in order to our outstanding staff, both paid and volunteer, some of whom are here tonight. And why don't you guys raise your hands and let's recognize that team. Got a good number of you here. I love that. I'm going to do something special tonight for those of you who are regulars. In fact, I always love checking to see how many people have attended a previous Marjorie Lynn Bank lecture in the last, say, 1 or 2 years. Show of hands, how many people? You're regulars. I like it. Well, I'm going to pull a fast one on you. Tonight, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to add a little 2-minute video here, a brief video about the impact that we're working to, that we are generating to improve life for both families and ecosystems right here in Baltimore. It's a piece on our biohuts, and if I don't screw it up, here it is.
When people are walking through the harbor, they tend to just dismiss the idea that anything is living underneath these waters. That's actually not the case. There is a lot of life in the harbor, and right now we're moving in a direction to support more life. The biohuts are providing a habitat in an area where there haven't been oysters here in 200 years, but now we have oyster reefs, and it's a modified idea, but it is working very well. The biohut is a 2-cage system, and one half of the cage is filled with oyster shells. The oysters provide a medium for rapid colonization, and so we'll see a lot of algae growth, copepods, a lot of a food source which attracts the local fish of the harbor into the cage. The other half of the cage remains empty, and this is really nothing more than a predator-free zone for these native animals. So they can actually move into the cage, have food, and be protected by larger predator animals like the Maryland blue crab. EcOcean approached us with the idea of their biohut, and they donated 8 biohuts for us to launch in the Inner Harbor. This is the first location in the United States to try this idea.
The idea is to really bring the function of shelter and food for the fish, because otherwise these bulkheads, they don't provide anything, they don't provide any functions. So all the baby fish will die by predation and starvation. So that's really the goal of the biohut.
The National Aquarium monitors the biohuts at least once a week. We want to look at what life is utilizing the harbor. We have a kind of a fisheye camera that we'll put into the water, and I have a monitor so I can see what's happening. Once a month, we will pull up a biohut out of the water and empty it just to see what's inside and count the different species and abundance. And so far, we have about 14 different native species that are living in the huts and utilizing that. Usually when I'm out here doing that, I do get a crowd of people They're really excited to see what's living in the harbor, and it kind of sparks an interest, and they ask what they can do to help.
People, usually they don't know that the harbor, there is fish inside, and I think that's also a good thing about the biohut. It makes people realize that the marina is not only a place to park boat, it's also an area where there is life. To bring back the ecosystem functions that were here before the construction of the port. That's the main idea of the biohut. We might change people's behavior, you know, they will preserve and respect the whole ecosystem.
There you go. These programs like Charmaine's Biohut program, our Biohut program that Charmaine has championed, our education programs, our field conservation work, all of these are programs for the youth of Baltimore, which is, of course, of great importance, and we all know that. Even this lecture series and many other vital programs are made possible through the support of people and organizations who believe in our vision of a healthier Chesapeake Bay and an ocean that sustains us, or what Ellen's and my friend Sylvia Earle calls Earth's blue heart. And I want to share my sincere thanks with our supporters here in the audience tonight for the help that you give us, and encourage you, those of you who are not yet donors or members, to consider doing so and know that we will spend your money wisely on this important mission. Okay, about our speaker. Well, first of all, we realized that we first met underwater. That's a natural. That's highly appropriate. Almost 20 years ago, when she was, and she'll tell you more about the mission, but she was chief scientist for the Aquarius reef-based program in Key Largo, operated jointly by NOAA and a couple of universities, and still the world's only permanently based undersea research station. She was breaking new ground then, and she hasn't let up since. Dr. Ellen Prager is going to talk to us tonight about some of the bizarre and awe-inspiring creatures and other ocean phenomena she's observed in her travels around the globe. And she's going to help us understand more the important role that they all play in this marine environment. Now, she's an accomplished marine scientist, a professor, degrees from Wesleyan, University of Miami's Rosenstiel School, PhD from Louisiana State, all that stuff, a geologist. But she's also renowned for her ability to make science entertaining and understandable for people of all ages, including and perhaps especially kids. After observing unusual creatures that she saw in the Galapagos, Caribbean, the deep waters of the Florida Reef Tract, she was inspired to share those experiences with others in a more entertaining and maybe more easily digestible way. And so she started writing, and she's written several books. Her first, The Shark Whisperer, was described by our friend Sylvia as an underwater Harry Potter. Her illustrated children's book is called Sea Slime. It's ooey gooey and under the sea, and introduce kids to the bizarre animals that use slime to survive. I love that part. And her most recent book is Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime, The Ocean's Oddest Creatures and Why They Matter. It gives readers a glimpse into marine biodiversity, its relevance to every one of us, and why the ocean and its inhabitants need our protection. Ellen has found a unique way to share her passion with others in a compelling and very interesting way, and one that just might inspire you to want to take personal action on behalf of that blue heart, that ocean that sustains us. And actually, when you think about it, that's the whole point of this lecture series. And so I hope you'll join us throughout the year as we venture into the ocean's extremes. Okay, remember to dream up great questions for Dr. Prager for our Q&A session, and join me in a great big Baltimore welcome for Dr. Ellen Prager.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, and thank you to everybody at the National Aquarium for inviting me, and all of you for coming. It is a true pleasure. Just earlier, I had a tour of the aquarium with one of the head curators, and I have to tell you, I loved it. I'm all about storytelling, and we got so many great stories, so it was really fantastic. But this evening, I'm going to talk to you about my book, Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime, the ocean's oddest creatures and why they matter. Now, let me just say, that was not the original title of the book. When I sold it to the publisher, it was something like Weird and Wild Under the Sea and Why Ocean Animals Matter. And they bought it, it was great, but I started doing the research for the book. And slowly, some very interesting themes evolved. It turns out, to bring forth the next generation of sea creatures, there's a lot of strange, shall we say, reproductive strategies going on underwater. Turns out that while I knew there are a lot of animals that are being studied in terms of human health for models and in the search for drugs, I never knew the breadth and diversity of creatures that are being studied, again, as either biomedical models or in the search for new pharmaceuticals. So that's where the drugs come from. And finally, I had no idea how many animals in the ocean use mucus in some way, shape, or form, whether it's for defense, to capture food, or to travel. It's a really slimy place under there. So voila, I got Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime. Now, I will tell you, the publisher is the University of Chicago Press. That is somewhat of a scholarly press. So they were I took a little arm twisting with the title, but I think they've been happy ever since. And so what I did is I chose some of my favorite wacky creature stories from the book and how these animals tie into society to show you tonight. But before I do that, I just want to give you all a little warning. Viewer discretion is advised. Content includes undersea animal nudity and explicit reproductive language. Yes, I see a couple people, you might have to do that. Just a warning. One of the first chapters in the book is called The Invisible Crowd, and it really is talking about the microscopic domain in the sea. In some places in the ocean, if you were to take just a teaspoon of seawater, you could have as many as 1 million creatures in that teaspoon of water. Now, remember when your mom said, close your mouth when you jump in? Yeah, there you go. Within this domain of the unseen, there are some beautiful designs. There are monsters, albeit in miniature, and there's even slime. Many of these animals are zooplankton, the drifting animals we call zooplankton, or drifting plants we call phytoplankton. And here's just a few. And this is one of my favorite images. How many of you have ever heard of a foraminifera? I know there's a couple. Oh, that's pretty good. So a foraminifera, it's a kind of a mouthful, is an amoeba-like creature that lives inside a calcium carbonate or limestone test, a shell. And you see it here. It looks either like a miniature golf ball or maybe a clump of golf balls together. And across, that's about 0.5 millimeter across. And so think about this. Amoeba-like creature lives inside its shell, and it floats around in the water, and then it exudes its arms of mucus, aka slime, outside of its shell, and it captures bacteria and phytoplankton floating by for food. That's kind of cool. Some of them also have spines like you see here, and those help them float. But look at this. See these kind of brown dots? Can anybody guess what those are? Eggs. That's a really good guess, but no. Anybody else? Mucus. Oh, that's a very smart guess, but no. Okay, so at dawn, the foraminifera uses its gooey arms to pull algae cells outside of its shell, to put them out on the spines to capture sunlight and grow. And then right before dusk, it pulls those algae cells back inside its shell. And that way, if there's not a lot of food, it's got a farm inside. Pretty clever. Very cool. And I will tell you, photographs of live foraminiferas with algae cells out on its spines are not very common. So that's one of the reasons I really love this. Ah, yes, the epic battle, the struggle for survival, the battle for supremacy going on in the microscopic world. It is between the heating gnat, also known as an arrowworm, and its favorite poor food source, the copepod. So look at this arrowworm. It has if you could see it, it's a paddle-shaped tail for propulsion. They are transparent for stealth. They have zinc-hardened arms out by its head. All along its body, it has hairs are like a motion detector. And when its poor favorite food, the hapless copepod, is swimming by, It can detect them. It reaches out with its arms, pulls the copepod towards its mouth, can extend its snout like a snake, and then it can even inject the copepod with the same deadly venom as a blue-ringed octopus. Now, these are voracious creatures. They are so voracious that if it catches a copepod that's a little too big, it will fold it over like a piece of pizza. And sometimes they're so hungry that they just keep shoveling copepods down and they die by overeating, a little too much. So I will tell you the one good thing is they're only several centimeters long, because if they were any bigger, we would not want to be swimming in the ocean. And now we're going to come to a little game I like to call Mystery Young. Many of the animals that make up this sort of invisible world in the ocean are larvae of creatures that when they become adults, you would easily recognize them. But as larvae, they're kind of this mystery young. They don't look like the adult form. So I'm going to show you the larvae, and I want you guys to guess what it is. Now, any biologists in the audience, you may not play. That's kind of cheating. But for the rest of you, just shout out what you think it is. So here's one. This kind of looks like a little Pac-Man creature. What do you think it is? Just shout it out. Squid. Squid, good guess. Crab? A ray. Somebody got it right? It's a crab. So obviously it goes through several morphological changes before it becomes an adult. Okay, how about this one? This one, I'll tell you, is very flat and very thin as a larvae. It kind of looks like, I heard it, a lobster. Very good. It's a spiny lobster. Excellent job. Spiny, oh, even better. Okay, so this one's tough. This is kind of a crazy one. What do you think? Jellyfish, it looks like a frog tadpole, right? No. What else? A stingray. Oh, a stingray is a really good guess. Okay, you ready? They are sea squirts. So what's really weird about this is that actually this part of it attaches to the bottom like a head, and it loses the notochord or tail and just forms this simple tube-like sea squirt. That's pretty crazy. There's weird stuff going on under there. Okay, this one is a tricky one. Everybody gets this one wrong. What do you think? Octopus, that's one of the most common guesses. Squid. Horseshoe crab. You ready? This one's pretty tricky. Seastar. Pretty crazy. Okay, now this next one's easier. How about this? A flounder. You're right. It's a flounder, so here it is. But look at that. There's something really odd about the larvae and juvenile versus the adult. It has eyes. The larvae has eyes on both sides of its head. As it grows, one eye actually migrates over the top of its head, and one side becomes blind and lies down on the blind side. And different species have eyes that rotate to different sides. So some are left side blind and some are right side blind. I bet you didn't know that one. Also within what we call the microscopic world, although they're not really microscopic because you can see them with the naked eye, are also something called euphausids known as krill. And I wanted to put them in here because they're sort of the protein drink of the sea. And many seabirds, seals, whales, and fish rely on krill as a food source. So they're very important, but we consider them part of the plankton. So why should you care about the plankton? Well, they're very important, as I said, in the ocean ecosystem. But it turns out that most of the fish species that we eat at some point in their life, when they're young, typically, or sometimes when they're older, feed on plankton. So that lovely fillet of fish you have in your plate is really a hefty dose of plankton. So you wouldn't have that. Fisheries account for something like 520 million jobs across the world. Well, if you don't have fish without plankton, you don't have 520 million jobs without plankton. They're also important in biotechnology. There's a really cool new compound coming from the shells of crustaceans being used. It creates fast clotting, and they're using them on bandages for the military and trauma situations. And of course, people are looking at phytoplankton possibly for biofuels. So plankton are not just important in the ocean ecosystem, they're very important to human society as well. Another chapter in the book with a wonderful title, Mega Slime, Seduction, and Shapeshifters. So now when I was thinking about I was thinking about writing a book about the diversity of life in the sea and why people should care. I had one sort of light bulb going off over my head moment, and it was when I was with a friend in Maine, and we were on a boat going across the Gulf of Maine to go hiking. And she said, "I'm not going swimming anymore in the Gulf of Maine." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Hagfish." I said, "Hagfish? I didn't really know about hagfish." Hagfish, shown here, are eel-like fish. They're not eels. They look like them, but they're fish. They are jawless, scaleless, finless. They tend to live deep in cold, salty water. There's hundreds of thousands of hagfish in the Gulf of Maine. And because they don't have a jaw, they have a tongue that has little teeth on them. But it makes it very difficult to bite through the scales and the skin of their prey. So they have to find other ways to get inside to the tasty organs and flesh. So they may go in through the mouth, through the gills, and I'm sorry to say, the back door. And so my friend was crossing her legs saying, "I'm not going swimming anymore in the Gulf of Maine." But you don't have to worry. They really only go after dead and dying things. It may mean no more burial at sea. For me, no. But it was funny because a friend of hers who's a triathlete said he wears a wetsuit for the summer, not because the water's all that cold, because of sneaky orifice-seeking hagfish. The hagfish is also known as the slime hag. And you see in the picture on the right, that's a researcher holding a hagfish with mucus or slime coming out. If they are being threatened or injured, they can exude copious amounts of slime. They can fill something like 7 buckets in 2 minutes with slime. I know, it's kind of disgusting, but there's a little problem for the hagfish. They can suffocate in their own slime. So they have evolved ways to get rid of it. They can actually sneeze it out their nose, or notice how flexible they are. They actually can wrap their tail around their body and move the knot up towards their head, and they squeegee off the slime. That's pretty cool. The hagfish are very important in the ocean ecosystem. They are like the cleanup crew, things that fall to the bottom, dead whales, dead fish, even fisheries discard. They are the garbage cleaner uppers. They get them. Biomedical research, scientists are really interested in hagfish because although they're feeding on dead and dying things and have a very primitive immune system, they don't get sick. So scientists are very interested in studying how that works. There's one guy I talked to who he's looking at the mucus to see if he can create something like akin to spider silk and create biodegradable materials. So in the future, we may be wearing clothes made of artificial hagfish slime. And in some place in the world, they put them on a stick and roast them. Yum, doesn't that sound good? Also within this chapter are the sea cucumbers. Now, how many of you guys are snorkelers or scuba divers? You guys seen sea cucumbers out there? Well, when you see them, they kind of look like lazy logs just sitting there on the bottom. And what they are, they're filter feeders. They either suck up sediments and filter out the organic matters, or sometimes they have tentacles that they either wave in the water to filter the water, organic particles from the water, or tentacles that they use in the sand. But they have some sci-fi appropriate abilities. If they're being threatened, they can change the texture of their skin to go from leathery or kind of gelatinous gooey. Even better, if a predator approaches, they eviscerate. And what that means is they eject their internal organs as a decoy and then slowly crawl away. That would be akin to, let's see, if a mugger was coming up to you and you vomited up your internal organs on him and ran away. Not so good for us, but what's amazing with the sea cucumber is that within 3 to 5 weeks, they can regenerate their internal organs. And so you can imagine scientists are very interested in figuring out how they do that. So they are also part of the ocean cleanup crew. Scientists are very interested in how do they regenerate their organs, and there are some places that eat sea cucumbers. Anybody here ever eaten a sea cucumber? What did you think? Doesn't taste like anything? How about up there? What do you think? Never again. Never again. That's a great answer. Kind of chewy, rubbery, that's what I've heard. Yeah, there is a problem in some areas of the world because of overfishing of sea cucumbers. It has become a big issue. Even I live in Florida, and in the Florida Keys, they're trying to get permits to collect something like 500 sea cucumbers a day. Hopefully that won't happen. Another chapter. This is one of my favorites. So another chapter is called Let's Talk Snails. So when I did the research for this book, and this is one of my favorite parts about doing books, is that you get to learn new things, and whether it's from journals or your colleagues. So I sent my colleague, Al Stoner, who's a fisheries biologist who's been working on queen conch. I sent him a note and said, hey, Al, do you have any cool stories about queen conch? Oh, and to my delight, he literally sent me an email that said, well, there's a real advantage to studying the reproductive biology of an animal that is slow, mates for hours on end, and has a penis half its total body length. And it turns out that scientists have known about the well-endowed queen conch for many years and have been writing limericks and funny poems about the queen conch. They call it the Verge. Here's a little picture of the male extending his verge into the female. Now, think about this for a minute. There's a reason he has to be so well-endowed. So here's the male, sidles up to the female, and he has to get his verge outside of his shell, around and down and under the female. So it has to be pretty long. But there's a little problem. Once it's outside of his shell, crabs and eels are only too happy to take advantage. But don't worry, men. Lose one, they grow another. Yes, the male queen conch can regenerate his penis. Who knew? Yes, very funny. They are also, has anybody here ever tried to clean a conch to eat it? They are one of the slimiest, right, John? They are one of the slimiest, disgusting. The slime is so thick that you can't get it off with soap and water. You need like vinegar or something acidic. It's amazing. Some more snails. There are snails in the ocean that are swimming snails. They actually spend their entire lives up in the water column, and they're called pteropods or sea butterflies. And the foot that we think of snails crawling around on has been modified into these two wing-like fins. There are shelled varieties. Here's a shelled one, pteropod, and here's an unshelled or naked pteropod. Very abundant, a very important source of food for other animals. And the naked ones have a very interesting reproductive strategy. It turns out they're all born, well, in some species, they're all born as males. They mate as males, swap sperm, and then they change into females. So there's no relationship problem. You just switch body parts and you're set to go. One of the most fascinating snails in the ocean is the cone snail shown here. Scientists think that of all the animals on the planet, the cone snail has the most potential for pharmaceutical development. And that's because even though it's a snail crawling on the bottom, there are some cone snails that hunt fish. And you think, how can that be? So what they do is they bury themselves in the sand, and they have a little siphon that they stick up that can detect chemicals. And when a fish is swimming by, they can detect it. And what they do is they shoot out a harpoon-like tooth that is tied by a tether to their body. They reel in the fish, and then they inject it with venom. Pretty cool. But what's really interesting is that there are some species of cone snail that if they inject it with the venom and the first strike doesn't work, they can change the chemistry of the venom and strike again. Very unusual. And already there is a painkiller on the market called Prialt that is derived from the cone snail venom. And what's exciting about this is that for somebody who is allergic or becomes addicted to morphine, they can now use this Prialt because it's non-opiate and it comes from the cone snail. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about biomedical research coming from that crazy creature. And I will say one thing. The toxicity of the venom varies greatly between species. And cone snails are also very big with shell collectors. So you have to really know before you pick one up whether that's the safe kind or the one nick in your dead kind. So be careful with those guys. The sea slugs. The nudibranchs are kind of the underwater equivalent of bling. They have, I kind of imagine if you took a classroom with kids and gave them, colored paper and pencils and magic markers, they would come up with some of these designs. Really beautiful. So this top picture, these are called clown nudibranchs. Nudibranch meaning naked gill. And there's a little action going on with these nudibranchs. And I know because they always do it head to tail. See these? It looks like ears. Those are actually called rhinophores. They're more like a nose. They detect chemicals. So that's the head of this one. That's the head with its rhinophores for chemical detection. And that's its gill on the back, the naked gill. So head, tail, head, tail. Yeah, a little action. This lower one, anybody guess what the common name of this one is? What does it look like or remind you of? No, close. I think breakfast food. Fried egg nudibranch. Exactly. And this, it kind of looks like cake frosting squeezed from a tube. That's actually its eggs. They lay their eggs in a template of mucus or slime. And they tend to be very brightly colored because we think that bright coloration is a warning for predators not to eat them. Some of the nudibranchs have spines in them. Some are toxic. And for the ones that don't have those defenses, they're brightly sort of colored as a bluff. So we think that's why the eggs are also brightly colored. But here's just a few more. They're really beautiful creatures. And one of the relatives is the sea hare, and they can eject a smokescreen of ink. So even the snails are important in terms of human society. Conch we use as food. They're important in local culture. The pteropods have been called the potato chips of the sea, those shelled varieties, because so many creatures eat them and they're so abundant. And when their shells fall to the seafloor, we can actually use those shells like ocean diaries to look at past ocean conditions, climate change, and of course, as I've already mentioned, biomedical research and drugs. I personally have done a lot of research in coral reefs, so I had to put some coral reef stories in the book. And here's a great image of a brain coral shown during the day and one at night. And what it really shows well is that most coral are actually colonies of small creatures called coral polyps, which is a ring of tentacles around a stomach. And during the day when you go on a reef, the corals really do look like rocks because the coral polyps are retracted. But at night, the coral polyps come out to feed on zooplankton in the water. And here's a close-up. Here's a great image of a coral polyp. Here's a colony. Here's an individual coral polyp, and that one's caught a fireworm. Now, what a lot of people don't know about is that corals, yes, they have tentacles, and a fire coral has strong enough stinging cells, or you can get a sting. But corals also have something called Mezen Tyrael filaments. Real estate is prime on a coral reef. Everybody wants space to grow. And corals tend to be pretty slow growers. Well, sometimes there are things like sponges, algae, and maybe even other corals that are faster growers, and they could overgrow a coral. Well, if this is about to happen, corals will send out these very skinny little tubes. In this picture, they're very hard to get pictures of. They almost look like angel hair pasta. They will send tubes called Mezen Tyrael filaments out from their stomachs, and they will squirt out digestive enzymes through those tubes, and they'll eat away at the invader. And so I couldn't help myself. I called it a gut reaction. It's coming from the stomach. But what's really, yeah, it took you guys a while. Okay, some of my jokes are a little lame, but you gotta, it's kind of fun. What's really interesting about these Mezen Tyrael filaments are that scientists have discovered that there's a hierarchy in aggression with them. And it turns out that the slower growing corals, the head and mound corals, are much more aggressive with their Mezen Tyrael filaments than branching corals. And that's why you can get a reef where you have head corals here and branching corals coexisting, even though the branching corals grow much faster and could overgrow the mound corals because the mound corals will attack it with the Mezen Tyrael filaments. So that's why it doesn't get overgrown. Really interesting. Some of the other fun residents on a reef, everybody knows this one, right? The green moray. Interestingly enough, they have no scales, so their bodies are coated in slime, thank you very much, to protect them. How about this one? What's this? Anybody know? It's got its eggs in its mouth. Very good. That's right. This is a male jawfish. The male jawfish incubates its eggs in its mouth, and periodically they'll spit them out and twirl them around to aerate them and then bring them back in until they hatch. Pretty cool. How about this fish? What's this one? Parrotfish. That's right. Now, parrotfish, very interesting. Not all species do this, but some parrotfish at night will sleep in crevices on the reef, and they will basically spin a cocoon of slime. Thank you very much. You're a very good audience. Spin a cocoon of slime around their bodies. And there's three theories as to why they do this. One is that it may mask their scent from predators like sharks and eels. Another is that the cocoon of mucus may in fact be toxic to eat. And more recently, a paper came out suggesting that it actually prevents parasites from getting on the parrotfish while it's sleeping. It could be one, it could be more, we're not sure, but it's very unusual to get a nice photograph of this one, so I really appreciated that. So coral reefs, there's been an estimate, a very conservative estimate years ago, was that if you look at all the services that coral reefs provide, it was something like $375 billion a year. Now, when I wrote this book, it was several years ago, I decided to look at Fortune 500 companies to see how many had annual revenues equivalent to that of a coral reef. And it was something at the time, and I don't know what it is now, but there were only about 2 companies that had annual revenues similar to what we think of as a coral reef. So we always think of industries as too big to fail. We have to save them. So we should think of coral reefs in the ocean in the same way. Too big to fail, too important. Armed and dangerous. Oh, you got to talk about the armed and dangerous creatures of the sea. Maybe not so dangerous. In this upper photograph, I have a wonderful image from Roger Hanlon in Woods Hole. He's been studying cephalopods and their camouflage abilities for years. Turns out that octopus and squid have the fastest camouflage abilities on the planet, faster than a chameleon. Here's one, a great picture. It looks like just a rock covered with algae, and all of a sudden you find out it's really an octopus. But what's fascinating is that Roger has discovered that most, maybe not all, maybe all, most cephalopods are colorblind. So now think about that. If they're colorblind, how the heck are they matching the bottom so rapidly? A really great question. Roger thinks they may have color sensing capabilities in their skin. Who do you guys think is funding his research? The military. Imagine if you had wetsuits, cars, tanks that could camouflage. Pretty cool. I think it will be the real version of the Harry Potter invisibility cloak will come from the cephalopods. So let's talk a little bit about reproduction in octopus. It's not a very cuddly thing. Typically, the octopus the male has a specialized arm that takes a package of sperm from its body and it passes it to the female. That's it, done deal, goodbye. But in the blanket octopus, it's not quite that simple. And this is a really cool octopus. It spends a lot of its time in the water column. There's the head, there's the arms, and it's got this sort of webbing that looks like a blanket. Well, in the blanket octopus, when the male passes a package of sperm from his body to the female, he self-amputates his arm and gives her that as well. Talk about self-sacrifice. But there's a little problem. After he has already self-amputated his arm and given her that, he dies. It's done, curtains, that's it for him. He's sort of a martyr for the species. Well, then there's the female. They find multiple male arms in the female's body. So she sort of swims around a little. The cephalopods are actually very important in biomedical research. It turns out squids have large, very simple nervous system and nerves. So scientists are using them to look at the nervous system and do studies. One of the things that when I was writing this book, it was a little bit while ago, I thought about 10 to 20 years ago when you went to a restaurant, it was pretty rare that you would have calamari on the menu. Now, almost every restaurant has calamari in the menu. It has become a very important source, not only of food, but jobs and revenue. And I will tell you, I'm all for sort of sustainability in fisheries, and squid are very fast reproducing and short-lived. So of all species that we consume, it's actually a pretty good one. Plus, I really like calamari. Also in this chapter, a little bit about Seastar. We saw one of these Seastars in one of the tanks up here, in the kelp tank, which they're really fantastic. The sunflower Seastar. And almost everybody knows that if an arm gets chopped off or something, they can regrow that arm. But what you may not know is that if that arm breaks off with a piece of the internal disc, that central disc, they can actually grow a new body. I see somebody going. And I can tell you, guys, all I think about is those bad B horror movies with the arms going like this. And it's kind of like that. It turns out that in the central portion of the disc of a sea star, they have duplicative internal organs. So if the arm breaks off with those organs in it, it can grow a new body. Box jelly. So as jellyfish goes, these are bad guys. Very strong sting. They also are jet propelled, unlike most jellyfish that just sort of pump their way up. These can jet propel. And what's really crazy about them, they're cube shaped. See this black dot? They have 4 sets of 6 eyes on the face of their cube. And what's amazing is scientists think that they create an image, a sort of a blurry image that allows them to head towards prey and avoid objects. But what's crazy is they don't have a brain. So we really don't understand how are they creating an image from those eyes without a brain. You know, one of the things I love about the oceans is there's still a lot of mystery out there. And that's a great example. You have to talk, if you're talking about weird creatures, you have to talk about some of the weird fish, right? So how about this one? Anybody know what that's called? No, I hear nope, I know. It's really weird. That's a barrel-eyed fish. They are sort of found in the deeper twilight zone of the ocean, and they have a transparent shield on their head, and these aren't the eyes, those are their eyes. They have weird tubular eyes that can rotate. Let's see, how about this one? Anybody know, what does that look like? A pine cone. It looks like it's a pine cone fish, also known as a pineapple fish. And how about this one? It's a cookie cutter shark. And the reason they're called cookie cutter sharks is because they have these sort of crazy jaws, and they can rotate around their jaws. And so what they do is they go up to a whale or a bigger shark, and they actually attach, they bite in, they rotate around their jaws, and they pull out a plug of flesh, just like a cookie cutter. Now, I was giving a talk one day, and somebody said afterwards in the questions, they said, well, oh my gosh, is this something we have to worry about, cookie cutter sharks, attacking us? And I said, oh, no, don't worry about cookie cutter sharks. Somebody very quickly after that sent me, of course, the internet, a great thing, an article about there's a deep water passage in Hawaii where there have actually been 2 cookie cutter shark attacks on humans. So now I say, other than the one deep water channel in Hawaii, you're pretty safe from cookie cutter sharks. Okay, how about this one? What's this? A pygmy seahorse. Oh, he's so cute. How about this one? Yeah, there's one here. It's a frogfish. Now, for those of you who can't, the cool thing about frogfish is it's kind of hard to tell where the fish is. So here are the pectoral fins. Right there's the eye. There's the mouth. And its dorsal fin has been changed into a little fishing pole and a lure. And it will sit perfectly still on the reef, waiting for somebody. It kind of wiggles that lure, waiting for someone to come in, and then it jumps out and grabs it. One of the exciting things in the ocean is that we've discovered that even in the most extreme, radical environments, not only does life exist, it thrives. And so we've been discovering new, really interesting species all the time. Here's a great example of a shark living in the northern high latitudes. Anybody know what kind of shark this is? Greenland shark, very good. It's a Greenland shark. As I said, they live in cold water, northern high latitudes. In the summer, they're very deep in the water. And at the winter, they actually will come right up to the ice edge. We think they can grow up to something like 15 to 20 feet and maybe get to be 200 years old. We suspect they have a very low metabolism. Not a lot is known about them. But in the few that have been captured and caught, when they cut the stomach open, they have found halibut, other sharks, seabirds, a reindeer, a dog. So they're supposedly these zombie-like slow creatures. How the heck are they catching those things? All I can picture in my mind is a reindeer, in the winter coming over the ice edge, looking into the ocean. Some people think it may be because many of them, off their eye, they have a parasitic copepod that trails behind them. Many of them have these, and they think that that may act like a lure. And things may be attracted to it, and so then they sort of grab them. Again, we're not really sure. Okay, this has to be my favorite name of anything. Bone-eating zombie snotworms. I couldn't make that one up. So these are tube worms that were discovered in Monterey Bay. They actually live on dead whale bones. And so here's a picture of a colony living on a dead whale bone. These each, they're like a skinny little pencil, so they're pretty small. Here's a close-up. There's the worm itself. And they have these bile-green roots that are chock full of bacteria that can digest fat and oil. And so one scientist is actually using the bacteria, to come up with the next super detergent, because they digest fat and oil. That's kind of cool. If they are disturbed, this is the reason they're called zombie snot worms. If they're disturbed, they release lots of gelatinous goo, slime. Very cool. And so I hope I have convinced you that no matter how big, small, or bizarre these animals are, they're not only important to the ocean ecosystem in terms of the food web, they're important to human society in terms of jobs, revenue, biotechnology, inspiring wonder and creativity. But of course, many of the creatures in the ocean are now at risk, because who is the ocean's most fearsome predator? Yay! We are, of course. So I get asked a lot by the media, what is the worst ocean problem? And I'll tell you, I hate giving one problem, because in different regions, you may have one issue or problem that overshadows the other. So I can't give you my one top. So I have come up with my top 5 ocean issues. But instead of me telling you, we're going to play a little game of Family Feud. And I want you guys to tell me what you think my 5 top pressing ocean issues are. So what do you think? Okay, so we got 1, yes. Overfishing is 1. Pollution, 2. Plastic, you're right, plastic, but we're going to consider that part of pollution. Acidification, which is part of climate change. Very good. Climate change, which it encompasses seawater temperature rise, ocean acidification, the rise of dead zones. So we've got overfishing, pollution, climate change. We need 2 more. Habitat destruction. Oh, you guys are good. Habitat destruction. Okay, so we've got overfishing, pollution, climate change, habitat destruction. 1 more. What was that? Yes, that's habitat loss. Very good. You're 100% right. There's another one. Noise. I'm going to consider that part of pollution. You're right. You're right. Should I give you a hint? Lionfish. Invasive species. That's right, invasive species. And I live in Florida, and we're having a huge problem with lionfish. But I will tell you the one good thing about lionfish, they taste pretty good. And so it is the one time I say to people, hunt, kill, and eat. Now, I don't want to talk about problems without saying something about solutions. And there is no one solution to all these problems. It's really sort of a toolkit. And here's just some of the things that I think we need to do. Things like create more no-take marine reserves. And that means they have to have enforcement. A marine reserve on paper does us no good. You have to have enforcement. We need to create sustainable fisheries. And my opinion with fisheries is there are some fish that we can farm sustainably in an environmentally friendly way. And there are probably some fish that we can, if we do it well, managed, we can commercially fish. But there are also some species that we can't probably do either of those things with. And we have to figure that out. Ecosystem-based management. These last 2 are something that I'm sort of involved with in terms of cultivating high-level ocean champions. And I firmly believe that we need to invest more in education outreach and local programs. And I've been involved in research, and I am a full supporter of research in terms of the ocean, but I think we're way far behind the amount we've invested in research versus education and outreach and local programs. And I'm sure, John, you will agree with me. Programs like this here at the aquarium, so many people build a connection and build a stewardship ethic that without these kind of programs, they'll never have. So I think we need to invest more in that. And as individuals, you can all do a lot of people think, oh, as one person, what can I do? But there's a lot of things you can do. You can have a voice for the ocean. As a constituent, as a consumer, you can tell your political representatives, whether they're on your school board, your development board, or national representatives, that oceans and coasts are important to you. What the goods you buy. And one of the things that's so simple, things like dispose of your trash properly. I just moved out of Miami, and one of the reasons I moved was because I was sick and tired of cleaning trash off the beach. It is horrible, and I don't understand how people don't know to dispose of their trash properly, but we have to get that message out. You're already doing something by getting here to the aquarium and learning more, but I would encourage you to share your passion. You guys are clearly interested. Bring some friends to another aquarium lecture, get them involved, share that passion. I would like to thank all the photographers who provided photographs, not only for the lecture, but that are in this book. And I will say that after the lecture and after the questions, we will have books outside that you can buy through the aquarium, and I'll sign them. But one of the fun things I was able to do with this book is I used a lot of amateur photographers, because people said, oh, you're not going to have just like the beautiful jumping whale picture. And I said, with a title like Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime, no. I had to have some unusual pictures. And I've really found an enjoyment in writing books. And so in addition to the Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime, here's a couple of my other ones. And what really did come out of this Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime is this book. And I brought a copy just if people want to look at it. The Sea Slime, It's Ooey Gooey and Under the Sea. And that was because I was giving the lecture for the Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime, and I was having so much fun with everybody. But I give you a warning on this book. In the back, there's a make your own slime experiment. And I have to apologize to parents for that. And then I will also say my most recent project, which I'm having so much fun with, is I'm writing a fiction series for middle grade students, which are, so we think of as 8 to 12 years old. But I will tell you, parents are reading with younger kids, and also older students and even adults are enjoying these books. And what I did is I combined adventure, humor, pretty sarcastic humor, with ocean issues, ocean habitats, sea creatures, and every book has different places, different adventures, a good villain. And so the first book came out last May called The Shark Whisperer, and the second book, The Shark Rider, just came out last week. And I've been getting the best notes from parents and kids. One of my favorites is I got a note from a kid, and it said, he's reading, the series is called Tristan Hunt and the Sea Gardens. It said, he's reading The Shark Whisperer, the first book. His other favorite book is Harry Potter. And when the movie comes out, he would like to play the main character, Tristan Hunt. And he has a pet fish to play a fish. I'm getting really great images. So these books are available either online, or if a store doesn't have them, you can ask them to order them. They're coming out. And it's, again, what John was talking about earlier. It's another way to engage kids, not only in reading, but building a connection to the ocean and a lifelong stewardship ethic, which is what it's all about. So I want to say thank you again to the National Aquarium, to my publisher for that, the Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime, and also to the Safina Center, where I've become a fellow, and they help support my going around and doing things like this and talking to people. And finally, thank you again. I think we'll be taking questions.
For Ellen, interesting question to start off with. How do you feel the field of conservation is changing?
That is a very good question. Actually, I think there's real hope in conservation. I think people are starting to recognize in the scientific community that we need to provide information that can be used in conservation, and we need to be involved in conservation, which I think for many years scientists did not want to do that. And so I think there's a real connection now between the science and conservation that is giving us the ability to come up with better solutions to some of the problems we're seeing. What do you think?
I would tend to agree. I think there's even a new concept called compassionate conservation, which is the idea that you can study the lives of animals in wild without actually impacting the lives of them. There was once a time, let's all think about, John James Audubon. He drew those fantastic, beautiful renderings of especially of birds. They were all dead birds he was drawing. He would shoot them first, which kind of made for a great picture, but not much for the bird. I think, the other thing that I've seen happening, we've had a couple people come in here and talk about it, is just how much we're able to learn in the pursuit of pure science, how much we're able to learn about the challenges being faced by many of the animals of the oceans. Some of the tagging of whales and large sharks is revealing how many of them are actually being entangled in debris and fishing gear, things like that.
Right.
So
Yeah,
they're really coming together.
Two other points on that. One is, you mentioned the tagging of sharks. The tagging and tracking is also allowing us to identify specific areas that need to be protected. And I think that's a really big improvement. If you can protect spawning areas and feeding grounds, that's a really big advantage in conservation that we didn't have before that technology. Another thing that I think is really helping us is the rise of ecotourism. And this picture, if you're wondering what kind of birds those are Nazca boobies from the Galapagos. Kind of goofy looking birds. And I'm very fortunate that I work as the science advisor for Celebrity Cruise Line's small ship in the Galapagos. And there is nothing better than getting people out to observe the ocean or observe wildlife firsthand in a way that they're not disturbing or hurting the animals to, again, pursue that. Those people then become conservationists. And so the rise of ecotourism, I think, is going to be very helpful.
And the key is to make sure it's the real thing.
Right.
Yeah. Zach, you got more for me there? All right. They're coming in. It's Hannah. Okay, we have one from our favorite question asker of the Marjorie Lynn Banks series, Hannah. Can box jellyfish look in 6 different directions at one time with those 6 sets of eyes?
Oh, everybody, wave your hand, Hannah.
There she is.
That is a really good question, and it's one of those kind of questions where I get to say, I don't know. I love being able to say, I don't know, Hannah. That's a great question. We don't even know how they process the image. So your question, are they processing multiple images or one image? Maybe. Here's my guess as a scientist, is I bet if they detect motion, they could probably detect motion, and that set of eyes is used to create the image, or wherever the eye that's looking towards that motion. It probably has something to do with the motion detection. That would be my guess.
Triggers some kind of response.
Yeah, that's a very smart question.
I see a field of study, Hannah. But on the other hand, she may want to go with us on our favorite, the hagfish.
Hagfish.
She'd like to know how.
You might have to go hagfish.
She had a second part to her question. How can hagfish produce so much slime in such a small amount of time?
Oh, so that's another really good question, and it was just something I didn't want to spend time on, but it's actually really cool. So what they do is they actually don't exude that mucus. What they do is they exude. It's a ball of. It looks like a miniature ball of yarn in a tight bundle. They're sort of threads and a little bit of mucus. And when it exudes these balls of threads, when it hits the seawater, they absorb seawater and it expands into that mucus. So they send out these sort of small mucus cells and then these balls of thread that absorb seawater and expand. It's like a giant sponge that creates slime. So they're very smart.
Brilliant. We love the hagfish. Who wouldn't? What's not to love? And that actually captured Elizabeth's question. Where are you, Elizabeth? There she is. Thank you for that one. Why does the slime help the hagfish? Well, wait, that's an additional aspect. Why does the slime help the hagfish?
Okay, so if you were going to attack a hagfish and you got a face full of slime, would that deter you? Yeah. So it really, for the most part, it is deter predators. It could be used as a decoy. It could just be to tangle them up, but it's really just to, let them get away.
Now, carrying on from there, this is a good one coming from a young person. What inspired you to become a marine scientist?
So a couple things. As a kid, I always loved nature, and I grew up running around the woods, climbing trees, playing nature girl. And then when I was in high school, I was a lifeguard teaching swimming lessons, and the guys I worked with brought scuba tanks to the pool. And they said, hey, you want to try these? I said, sure. They could not get me out of the pool. I just sat on the bottom of the pool with a scuba tank saying, this is the coolest thing ever. And so I went back to my parents. I was in high school, and I said, hey, I want to learn how to scuba dive. And they said, you have a job, you have money, you have a car, have at it. They thought it was a phase, like a musical instrument or ice skates, but little did they know. And then when I found a way that I could combine nature, scuba diving, and I had a real interest in science, nature, science, scuba diving, that was it. I was hooked. Marine science was for me.
A scientist is born. So from there, what advice would you give someone here in the audience tonight who might be interested in pursuing marine biology as a profession?
So a couple pieces of advice. If any of you, whether you're here or you have children or grandkids that are interested in marine science, a couple things. You want to have a really good basic undergraduate degree in science. It doesn't have to be marine science, marine biology, a really good solid background. And then on top of that, I always encourage people to do things outside of school, to volunteer, things be involved with the aquariums, nature centers, universities. A lot of them have summer programs. There are summer camps. So get involved and explore, not only explore what aspects you like, but also meet people. People don't say, in business they say network, network. Well, I'll tell you what, science is like that too. So you need a good science background, experience outside of school, and then just start meeting people, talking to them, asking questions, seeing what they do. That's all part of it. And work hard. I did not have any inroads into this. I didn't know anybody in marine science when I went into it, but for me, it was a true passion. I love working hard, I love challenges, and I was always willing to go after things, be very proactive. And so I got a lot of opportunities because of that. And I chased a lot of opportunities.
Well, and in the time that we've been in this field, you and I, we've watched it go from almost completely male-dominated. There was Edie Clark and Sylvia Earle and about 2 other women, to one that actually I think has probably got more women entering the field now than men,
That's
right?
True.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right.
And it's wonderful to see just how many minority kids are getting involved in marine science now. So it's very exciting that way, and there is still a world of opportunities. When you think about all the questions that Ellen put up on that screen, all the possibilities, all the unrealized prospects, there's a world of opportunity out there.
Yeah.
In fact, this question is about that. Can you talk a bit about any new antibiotics that are being found in the ocean or in sea life?
One of the things I discovered when I wrote this, as I said, is how many animals are being used either for the search for pharmaceuticals or as biomedical models. In terms of antibiotics and also cancer treatment drugs, there are, I actually wrote a blog for the Huffington Post about this, which you could probably find online, but there's something like, don't quote me on the number, something like 15 drugs either out on the market, in clinical trials, sort of serious clinical trials that come from marine organisms, including antibiotics and anti-cancer drugs. There's quite a few, but it's a long process, and there are numerous universities that have big programs in the search for pharmaceuticals from marine organisms. Now, one thing I want to make clear, when we're talking about this, we're not talking about harvesting animals or organisms from the sea. We're talking about things that you discover the chemical from the animal in the ocean, and then you either synthesize it in the lab chemically, or you have to do aquaculture. So it's not something that you're going to harvest, so we're not encouraging overfishing.
Well, let's move to that topic. I've got a couple of great questions here, and here comes one which is a leading question because it has a question and then it has a desired alternative. What seafood should we be staying away from as consumers? Please don't say blue crabs. There's a Marylander.
Okay, so there's a couple reasons why you might want to stay from certain seafoods, and I'm sure you've heard this. Mercury is one. So sharks, tilefish, tuna is an issue with mercury. It bioaccumulates in the bigger fish, swordfish. On the other hand, the other reason to stay away from things are sustainability. And things like tuna, bluefin tuna in particular is one that I would stay away from. So I'm not going to rattle these off because there's really good information out there. If you go to Monterey Bay Aquarium, if you go to the Safina Center, they have great lists of what are your best choices, what are okay choices, and what are the things to avoid. I personally don't eat grouper because I swum with them so many times and they're like little puppy dogs. And I don't think it's a sustainable fishery, so I don't eat that. I'm more likely to have mahi-mahi, squid, shellfish. So there are seafood that I think we can eat. And here's my take on seafood. If we want people to value the ocean and want to protect it, I think we have to continue to consume fish. But we have to do it in a way that it's well managed and sustainable. Because if you just say, stop eating fish, people may not have a reason for protecting the ocean. A lot of people won't. And many fishermen are really wonderful protectors of the ocean because it's their livelihood. So it has to be a balance between exploitation, using the ocean and using fisheries, and protecting it. And I don't think we've found that correct balance yet. But I think we're moving closer towards it than we ever have.
industrial scale is where it goes wrong.
Right.
Yeah. And you might have noticed almost, I think the names of every seafood that Dr. Prager just mentioned as being the kind that are sustainable are short life cycle animals, and that's one of the things that I think makes it much more feasible. Well, on that front, do you have concerns about the consumption of krill and other wild fish in the forms of fish oil and fish meal?
Very much so. Krill are so important in the ocean ecosystem. As I've said, sort of the protein drink for so many of the animals in the ocean that I think we have to be very careful in harvesting krill. Also, a lot of it's done in the Antarctic, in places that are pretty remote, so it's very difficult to control. So there's a couple problems with that, yeah. But some people say that we should be eating lower on the food chain, so in fact we should be consuming krill. But I think we have to be very careful there.
Well, I think it also applies to our dear little menhaden here in Chesapeake Bay and throughout the mid-Atlantic region. It is truly, there's a book written called The Most Important Fish in the Sea, although I think there are many most important fish in the sea, but that menhaden has such an important role to play in our ecosystem, and to grind them up for fish meal to the asker of that question.
Well, and to feeding things like pigs and feeding.
Yep. Feedlots.
You're
and
feeding
fertilizer.
Fish. And fertilizer, that's just not right.
No, that's not right. Well, let's get back to mucus.
See, I've got them hooked on slime. It happens every time.
And she's got somebody who's got a great question. Isn't mucus a great sunblock? Is that incidental to its other purposes?
Okay, so I'm not sure if all mucus has sunblock capabilities. But I will say the reason so many animals in the ocean use mucus is because it's very energy efficient to make. It's basically like the body of a jellyfish is just a little bit of protein, some sugars, and a lot of seawater. And that's how you can make mucus. So energetically, it makes sense for sea creatures to use it in many different ways possible. Sunblock, I haven't heard about that. I will say in corals, I didn't mention this, it's in the book though, corals have mucus on top and they sort of use them as a wash. So one time I was actually drilling through a coral head for a geological study, and if you disturb a coral, they will exude huge amounts of, we called it coral snot, and we came out just covered with mucus. And so they use it so that if sediment or something falls on a coral, they will exude mucus to take that sediment off the coral. I've also heard that some corals, they do have sunblock capabilities in that mucus. Oh, okay. But in general, I would have to say, I'm not so sure. That's another good study for a young marine biologist.
You guys paying attention out there? Okay, here's a doozy. What's your opinion of programs where you can swim with dolphins, manatees, rays, etc.?
That's a really good question. And I will tell you, I was in March up in Crystal River swimming with manatees. And you can't touch manatees, but there's nothing against them touching you. And what I like about it is that there's a roped off area. And if the manatees don't want to interact with you, they can go into the roped off area and they don't have to interact and it's fine. But I will tell you what happened is a manatee came up to me, put its snout here, and then it grabbed me. Both flippers around my body and hugged me tight. I was laughing so hard I spit out my snorkel. It was the best thing ever.
She exuded mucus.
I exuded mucus. I probably was exuding. I loved it. It was so much fun. And I will tell you, one manatee hug and you will protect manatees the rest of your life. So this gets back to this ecotourism question. I don't believe in the capture of wild whales and dolphins, and we don't do that anymore. But if they're caught for rehabilitation purposes or rescued or bred in captivity and they cannot be released, they do so much good for education and conservation. It's the same thing with zoos. I hate seeing a lion or a tiger in a cage, but most people will never see those things out in the wild, and it's the same in the ocean. So I have very mixed emotions about keeping animals in captivity, but if it's done in the appropriate setting where they have plenty of room, I mean, like here, the other way to think about it is, look, the sharks here and the fish here, water quality is perfect, they're fed every day, they don't have predators chasing them, it's a pretty good life. So I think it's very important for conservation and education that we do have facilities that have the animals. But in terms of whales and dolphins, no wild capture anymore. We know too much.
And I think really the driver for this is if we can emulate their real habitat, if we can give a pretty decent approximation of the world that they come from.
Minus
then,
predators.
Yeah, well, without the
Minus
without
pollution.
the predation, although we've got some predation in blacktip reef. Fortunately, not much because we've recreated it so carefully that the little guys have places to hide and they naturally go to the places they would go to on a real reef. But that doesn't stop the blacktip reef sharks from chasing them around. But if you can replicate those habitats, if you can create a setting that is what we call in the aquarium business naturalistic, like nature, that's important. And if we can't, then we really have to question ourselves,
Right.
which is also why, as many of you know, we're trying to figure out what to do with the dolphins here and talking about the prospect of perhaps finding them a new home in a more natural setting. Got time for a couple more. And one of them is about prescription drugs, which is but the other half of the prescription drug equation, and that is there are issues with the disposal of prescription drugs through our waste stream. It impacts severely locally. Does it also impact ocean animals?
I suspect, and again, this is one of those things that we don't have really good data on, but I suspect mostly it's impacting coastal organisms where you're getting outflow because we haven't found ways to take out the prescription drugs, typically in wastewater streams. So we're probably seeing most of the impact in coastal waters just because the nature of it. Out in the open ocean, probably less so. But it's certainly something to think about, and just like we've seen with plastics, plastic has become so pervasive in the ocean that it's something to worry about, and certainly the evidence is that it can change the behavior and the reproductive success of some of the fish. So, I think how we process our waste, we're slowly getting better, but I think the removal of nutrients, it's not just prescription drugs, but the removal of nutrients and drugs is something that we have to do better on.
And one of the things that I think many of the people in this room know, but it's an important one, is that we always think we've all been trained to think nutrients are good, and they are until there's too much of them.
Right.
And nutrients take the form of decomposing matter from vegetation and of course from human waste, but also things that are generally good for oceans and waterways until you concentrate them and then discharge them in very small areas. And that's certainly Chesapeake Bay's biggest challenge, I think, right now. I think we're down to our time for last one, and this is a great one to end on. What is the most important thing that families can do to protect the ocean?
None of these most important things. Let me give you a couple things. I think one of the most important things, and you're already doing it if you're here, and that is making the oceans something that your family is involved in, and teaching your kids to dispose of their trash properly, to conserve energy, to appreciate and respect the ocean and marine life. And not only doing it with your own family, but doing it with friends, and to pass that message on. I think also having a voice for the ocean. And we need to let our political leaders, and not just on a national scale, but locally, you can send a letter. You can call your local congressman office or your development board. You can have your kids, that's even better, write a letter about the importance of the oceans and coast. So having a voice for the ocean and getting involved, I think, is probably the best thing you can do.
All of which says take personal action. And if you, by the way, a couple thoughts spawned by what Dr. Prager was saying. We're right now about midway through what we call 48 Days of Blue, which is 48 days. Each day there's a special idea, a thing that you can do. It's the 48 days between Earth Day and World Ocean Day. And a lot of aquariums are participating in this now. And if you sign up, you just go to 48daysofblue.org, and you will get an email every day that tells you one of the things that you can take on. And they're all the simple kinds of things that we've been talking about here, but that help make a positive difference. And I forgot to circle back on the blue crab question. True blue, Chesapeake blue crabs in season are still on the green list, aren't they, Eric? Most of at least during the right season? So these are you. It's a tough area to navigate. And one of the things that's Eric Schwab. Most of you know, our chief of conservation, and his team has started up a whole new initiative just in the last 6 months for sustainable seafood that has a real Chesapeake and Mid-Atlantic focus. And we're really working on honest seafood labeling. And so you'll hear more from the aquarium in the months and years to come about some of our iconic species like the blue crabs, the rockfish, and of course the oysters. And as I think you said, Dr. Prager, there are very sustainable alternatives. We just need to make sure that we turn to those. And
Right.
since I'm guessing if I ask for a show of hands, everybody in the room who has had a bite of lion, panther, let's see, leopard, tiger, anybody? No? Oh, come on, certainly somebody's had some, thank you. None of us have had any major predators, terrestrial predators in our diet for an awfully long time, maybe a couple hundred years maybe.
That was the lionfish.
Oh, thank
Oh.
you. Good on you, keep eating that one. But that's the point of it. The tuna are one of the most superbly adapted predators of the sea, so why are we eating them? That's just not the ones we need to be feeding on.
Right.
Any closing comments, Dr. Prager?
No, I just again want to thank everybody for coming. It's been a pleasure. You guys were a great audience. You laughed at my jokes. You answered good questions. It was really fun. If you have other questions or if you want to get a book signed, please join me outside afterwards. I'm going to be there. And again, thank you very much. Go Blue.
Thank you all, and let's give a big hand.